Stuck between a libertarian and a Republican. Welcome to Publitarian Podcast.
Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, and I said that out of order, everyone. This is Ronald Johnson, Publitarian, coming at you again with another episode of Publitarian Podcast, and we are up to episode number 47, and this is part D of what I did last week, The Bigger Problem. So we're going to get into part 2 of The Bigger Problem, but before I do that, I would like to give a shout out to my boy, Made by Jim Bob. That's at Made by Jim Bob on Instagram. I'm sure you know of the savage memer known as Jim Bob. If not, you need to go back and check out episode number 37 of my podcast where I interview him. Just a really awesome guy, and he does some great memes. And it's on his Instagram at Made by Jim Bob. And my book just came in the mail today, Savage Memes, Volume 1, Made by Jim Bob. It's a hardcover coffee table book, and there was some additional swag in there as well, like a sticker and a couple other doodads, and he signed the book too. So Jim Bob, thank you so much for that. Shout out to him. Go check out his work. Also, what I got in the mail today is my Louder with Crowder mug. I'm sure you people know who Steven Crowder is. So in lieu of beer from the beer fridge, I am drinking a rum and coke out of my Louder with Crowder mug, and it's actually a really cool mug. Of course, I flip over the mug and I see Made in China, and I get sad because is anything made in America anymore? I don't know. Even people that promote American exceptionalism are getting their things from China. I joined the NRA, by the way. This was back in, 2011, when we were all scared to death that Obama was going to break in our doors and take our guns away. Or there was going to be some kind of uprising where we needed a gun. I don't know. I was scared like every other right-winger was, so I went out and rushed out and joined the NRA. And the NRA sent me this beautiful golden bullet pen. And right there on the side of the golden pen, it says, Made in China. And I was like, well, is anything made in America anymore? I don't know. Also, plugging another thing that just made me think about that. Red Pilled America is doing a podcast on this subject. I love their podcast. I like their podcast even better than my own. I hate plugging other stuff, but hey, it is what it is. It's a good podcast. Red Pilled America is doing a podcast on the history and production of the baseball cap. It's like such an iconic Americana item that all of us have worn or own a couple of, and it's produced mostly in Bangladesh and China and other places. And so they are on this quest in their podcast to see if they can actually get an American-made product in America by Americans, and how much I guess it's going to cost them to produce it and everything else. So they're doing like a fundraiser now on Red Pilled America to see if it can be done. I'm sure it could be done. It's probably be done 70% more money than what you would be willing to pay for a baseball cap. But that's going to address another problem that we have here in this country. We've gotten so used to the cheap goods that if we really do try to start to fix the tariffs, the shipping, and everything else that's cattywampus in this country, there's going to be some hard lessons that we're going to have to learn. Like, TVs don't cost $100. You can't get a whole closet full of clothes for $100. There'll have to be some hard lessons for us to learn in our consumer economy. I have nothing wrong with us being a consumer economy, but we need to venture back into being a manufacturing economy where we produce and innovate, or else we will be consumers consuming, and then we will run out of capital with which to consume the goods. That's my little soapbox about that. Anyway, I picked up the Steven Crowder mug. I love Steven Crowder. I watch his show. For years, I've watched his show. But I joined the mug club. He's got this mug club that helps produce his show and pay for his show because YouTube likes to demonetize him. I did so holding my nose because he's in league with the Blaze, and I just really don't have any love for Glenn Beck. Whoops, there went half of my audience. No, wait, come back. Let me explain. For those of you, if you don't know who Glenn Beck is, I guess it doesn't matter, but he used to be like a conservative talk show host. He was actually did local radio not too far from where I live in Florida. So I was a fan of his local stuff. And then he got nationally syndicated, had a good radio show. It was freaking hilarious, by the way. He did these good bits, good spots. And then he went on Fox News, and yeah, he was okay on Fox News, a little doom and gloom. And then something happened, and he just like went off the deep end. Like I even own some of his books, so I'm well versed in Glenn Beck, in Glenn Beck lore. And then something happened, and he just went off the deep end. And come around election 2016, he actually encouraged his listeners and viewers and followers to vote for Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election. And I've never been able to get over it. It's like somebody being cheated on. I'm like, I gave you my money, I gave you my time. And he just had TDS, like a lot of people, and he couldn't see the forest for the trees. And I've said this before about Donald Trump. He may not be the fighter that you want, but he's the fighter that we have. And he's the fighter that's getting it done. So if you're not backing him at this point and you're going to throw yourselves in league with the left to try and prove a point that you've got some kind of moral high ground above everybody else, no thank you. You're a part of the problem as well. Bongino talks about this, the battlefield morality and the battlefield mentality. If you're in a trench with somebody, you're not worried about what he's doing, if he's cheating on his wife or if he said grab him by the, or whatever. You're trying to win a war, and that's where we're at now in this country. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. We're 40 years too late to this culture war, and we're trying to turn the ship around. We're trying to bail out water, and you got idiots like Beck drilling holes in the deck to get the ship to sink to make a point that they were right about something when they're not. So that's my rant about that. So having said that, I didn't mean to go on a 7-minute rant about that, but I am currently holding my Made in China Louder and Crowder mug because I love Steven Crowder. I just hated that I had to give money to the Blaze to support Steven Crowder. So that's the end of my rant on that. So to catch everybody up, part 1 of the Bigger Problem podcast. Of course, you can always go back and listen to it, but I was talking about the unaccountable bureaucrats that truly run this country. And there needs to be something done about it. And I hope and pray something gets done about it. And now we're moving on to part 2. So what's part 2 of the bigger problem? That would be voter fraud. And you go, oh, come on, Ronald, there's no voter fraud. Okay, let me start telling you how I know that there's voter fraud. My very first example that I could just pick off the top of my head is that the Democrats and the liberals and the media are very adamant that there is no voter fraud. So what does that tell you? That tells you that there's most certainly voter fraud. Whatever they tell you, it's always the opposite. But that's just anecdotal evidence. Let me get to the hard stuff. Here we go. From Breitbart News, in the penis of America, which is what I like to call my state, Florida. Battleground, Florida. Soros-funded groups work to register 1.4 million ex-felons ahead of 2020. Fresh off the heels of their recent major policy wins, the criminal justice reform movement, funded by George Soros groups and backed by some globalist Republicans, is now determined to end GOP presidential victories for good. Progressive organizations, many financed by billionaire activist George Soros, are working overtime to restore voting rights for Florida's nearly 1.4 million ex-felons, as the nation's biggest swing state seems poised to play a pivotal electoral role in the 2020 presidential race. The current battle revolves around a Florida state amendment that was passed last year restoring voting rights for felons, with progressive groups opposing a local bill that would require the state's ex-felons to first pay civil fines and court fees before registering to vote. Okay, yada yada, it goes on and on. I know what you're saying. You're saying, Ronald, that's not really voter fraud. Okay, they're starting to cook the books here. So this is just part 1. Don't worry, I'm going to get to the voter fraud. So what do we have here? We've got the biggest swing state that's usually up for grabs every election, and they have got to stack that. They got to stack that thing blue, because Democrats and liberals, as you know, cannot win ideological battles. They have to cheat. They have to rig the courts. They have to rig the system. They have to redraw the congressional lines. They can't win on ideology alone. All they have is Orange Man bad, and let's cheat our asses off. To further bolster my claims of voter fraud, in my own state of Florida, Miss Brenda Snipes, the old Broward County Elections Chief Supervisor, and her long history of trouble. And this is from the Sun Sentinel, which is a local paper here. Anyway, I'm not going to go into it, but if you don't know about Brenda Snipes, during the 2018 midterms, she was caught red-handed, not turning votes over. She had votes behind closed doors saying they needed to look at some things first. Well, they were doctoring votes behind closed doors. And she was the election supervisor for 15 years. She's been in some close elections, 2002, 2004, 2006, 2012, 2016, and of course 2018. A court ruled that she had broken election law when she destroyed ballots from the 2016 election, 12 months after it instead of the 22 months required by federal law. A federal marijuana amendment was left off some ballots in 2016. Election results in the 2016 primary were posted on the elections office website before polls closed. In 2012, almost 1,000 uncounted ballots were discovered a week after the election. In 2004, some 58,000 mail-in ballots were not delivered to voters, leaving election officials to scramble and send new ones. This is all just through the years, and this lady was still on the job. And the 2018 election was finally the one that put the nail in the coffin for her. The reason I'm saying I know voter fraud exists, this is one county. Think about that. This is one county. So if it's happening in one county in Florida, where else is it happening? Where else are we not hearing about? My listeners are from all over the world, especially in the U.S., of course. And I know that you can tell me local elections voter fraud stories of some kind of cooking of the books. Just start thinking about it in your mind. And you've been thinking this whole time that it's an isolated incident or it's just in my area. I'm telling you right now that it's not. From February of 2019 in New Mexico, evidence of voter fraud in tight House election. Media called race for Republican, and then more ballots showed up. And the article goes on. Do you want me to keep going? I can give you more. So start thinking about that. Think about your own state. Think about your local elections. And think of the evidence of voter fraud that you've seen yourself. And now apply that nationally. I used to live in Birmingham, Alabama. I don't really have an accent, but I lived there for many years. I'm convinced that election was because of voter fraud as well. I know, we know about the Roy Moore controversy. Yeah, he wasn't the best candidate in the world, but Doug Jones was freaking horrible. Well, Jefferson County, which is where Birmingham is white people are a minority there. It's all black Democrats. Especially in Birmingham, the city. The city council is all black, and they vote Democrat. And the city's a shithole, too. I know that. I've spent many, many years there. I think that there were votes that were counted and double counted and triple counted and invented to turn that state blue for Doug Jones. Now, I don't have any evidence of this. This is just what I think. Because Alabama is basically a red state. If you take away that pocket right in the middle, that's Birmingham, you have a red state. Same thing with Georgia. If you take away Atlanta, boom, red state. Now, Florida is purple. Everything around the coast is blue, and as soon as you move in from the coast, it's just red, regular old, Floridaites. I would say crackers, but that kind of has like a racial connotation to it that I don't mean. So anyway, from the National Review, and this is a 2013 article, the latest evidence of voter fraud and discrimination. Obama administration officials and their liberal camp followers who routinely claim there is no reason to worry about election integrity because vote fraud is non-existent suffered some embarrassing setbacks last week. Federal law requires states to clean up their voter rolls. In 2009, the Obama Justice Department dismissed, with no explanation, a lawsuit filed by the Bush administration asking Missouri for such a cleanup. It has since taken no action against any other state or jurisdiction since it has an unofficial policy of not enforcing this requirement. But private parties are starting to force changes. Anyway, it goes on. And we all know the old adage about, dead people voting, Democrat, they rise from the grave and vote Democrat. I did a shtick on that back in October around Halloween time. Voter fraud is real. It is happening. And with our southern border still porous because Democrats are doing everything they can to block it, it's only going to get worse. These people get into the country, they get into the system, and they stay, and they vote. And I have seen firsthand evidence of this. I actually used to date an illegal immigrant. I didn't know she was illegal. Dated for 3 years. Figured it out. That's not why we broke up. It was just, oil and water. It didn't work out. But illegal immigrant, still had a social security card, still had a driver's license, could do everything an American citizen can do, including vote, even though they shouldn't be doing that. So don't tell me voter fraud isn't part of this problem. It is. It's very real, and it does exist. And if we do not start addressing this problem, it's only going to get worse, because illegals are still coming into the country, and they are going to vote for whoever gives them the benefits. And Republicans aren't going to do it. Democrats certainly are. Democrats need a new voting class of people. Black people, praise the Lord, are starting to wake up. For generations, they've been taught, just vote Democrat. They're taught from the pulpit. Vote Democrat. They're for our people. They take care of us. And if you take care of them, they'll take care of you. They're finally, thank you for Candace Owens and African Americans like her that are finally starting to wake people up to the culture of voting Democrat just because that's what you do. So Democrats are already starting another attack. They're seeing that Hispanic people, according to Hispanic people, I'm not making generalizations. These are Hispanic people that have told me this. They don't vote unilaterally. They just vote whatever they think is important, just like anybody else would. The African American population, like I said, has been taught this, that's just the mentality. That's how you vote. That's what you do. Hispanics, they just kind of vote whatever is important to them, whatever the issue is important to them and their family. So they're not a guaranteed voting bloc. Black people used to be a guaranteed voting bloc. You're talking like 90-something% voting Democrat. So 13% of the population, that's a good swath of Democrat voters. Well, the problem is, for the Democrats, they're starting to wake up now. And they're starting to vote Republican and be free thinkers and getting released from this groupthink of being a liberal Democrat. Charles Barkley himself said poor people have been voting Democrat for 50 years and they're still poor. And that's the case because the Democrats, I don't need to preach all this stuff to you guys. If you're listening to my podcast, you know this stuff. They want voters, they want obedient little soldiers that will vote Democrat and keep the power holders in power. And that's starting to change, so they need a new voting base. You can only create so many victims. And now a lot of the victims are claiming better victimhood over other victims, and it's starting to become just a jumbled mess. So they need to import new voters, and that's what they're doing with illegal aliens. And it's going to happen through voter fraud. And if the president and what we have in Congress and the Supreme Court doesn't start looking into this or taking some kind of action, I don't know what the answer would be. Maybe a voter ID, a national voter ID. I cannot believe, just bare minimum, show an ID to vote. You have to do it in certain places. I know in my local area, I have to show my driver's license to vote. I just can't go in there and say I want to vote. But it's going to be a huge problem if we don't address it. So that wraps up my two-part series on the bigger problem. If we do not get this voter fraud taken care of, this next election cycle, we're going to be screwed. And if we do not start addressing the thousands upon thousands of unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats that are in our federal, state, and local systems, we're going to be screwed there too. So there's your Debbie Downer rant from Ronald Johnson, Publitarian today. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you want to reach out to me, you can. I am publitarian@gmail.com or thepublitarian@gmail.com. You can DM me on Instagram. I am on minds.com. I am on all the social medias, Gab, all of them. Instagram is the one that I stay on the most. And that should do it for me on this edition of Publitarian Podcast, and I will talk to you guys later.
listening to Proletarian Podcast. Copyright 2019.